through this little kind of treatment train here, and then if anything's left, it'll continue on to an inlet down the street. This is a plan enlargement of that, just kind of indicating how all that works. You get a sense of how they've handled some of the details. A fair amount of water is pouring into these things. You know, and they're getting pretty full. There's 7 or 8 inches of water there, again, in those, about 4 feet wide. They left the existing sidewalk in place and the existing curb in place. So again, just trying to make things as simple as possible. They've got some breaks on the sort of the high side of the sidewalk here, so water flowing across the sidewalk can still get in here. And just a few pictures of this thing. Whoops, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to go quite so fast. They're under construction. Contractors are pretty unfamiliar with these. This is one of the lessons learned from Portland. Takes a lot of time in the field, apparently, to sort of work with them and help them understand what this is all about. Forming up the curbs here. And you get a sense of what everything looks like before you know, the planting mix is added. They note here that the bottom of these things is broken up. That's a very important sort of detail, to make sure that the bottom of these pits is broken up so that you don't, you know, create a bathtub where that water just sits there. It's got somewhere to go. Really attractive, you know, way to handle the street, and looks much better than it did before. And again, they've got their interpretive signage here. So here's some of the vital signs here. About a 300 square foot area, which in this case was 4% of the watershed, and this one was $35,000. A little more intensive, you know, hardscape kind of program associated with this. Their maintenance schedule is semi-annual visits, may need more. In talking with them, the city recently, finding out that what they now do is essentially plan to maintain these rain gardens on a quarterly basis. They send 2 people out a quarter, and they're just doing weeding, and they take a sort of flat-edge shovel, and they shovel out sediment, pick up trash and things like that. They figure it's about $1.25 a square foot a year to maintain these, which really isn't too bad. This next project is Glencoe Elementary School, and this really is it for the Portland stuff. There's a couple very short examples, but this one I thought would be interesting for you guys to know about, because it was a project that sort of came about because a lot of the homes in the area were having drainage problems. They had a combined sewer, and they would have heavy rains and a lot of bad stuff sort of backing up into their basement. This is the area before, and they used some school property adjacent to the neighborhood to solve the problem, because they had a little bit more space to work with. And this is what they did with it afterwards. This gives you kind of a sense of the context. So this was a 35,000 square foot watershed, so a much bigger watershed than they had previously been dealing with. Water was flowing down this block and down this block and accumulating in this area, either making it into an inlet or sort of flooding this area. And so that's where they decided to put this thing. Here's a plan enlargement of what this particular one looks like, very different from the last couple. Water comes in right here through a pipe. And then this whole area right here is a forebay, so there's stone and sort of a monoculture of rushes in there, I believe. They use rushes a lot in these forebays because they're fairly stiff plants, and they do a good job of kind of combing out the suspended solids and different things that pollute the water when it comes in. So water is slowed down in the forebay, and then it travels around sort of in the spiral shape to an inlet that's right here. That inlet is raised up a little bit so that the water can just, 6 inches of water or so stacks up there, and then it percolates down. And then if more than that comes in, it just goes into the inlet. So this gives you a sense of what that looks like during a storm event. Here's that inlet, and again, about 6 inches of water or so can stack up before it begins to pour into that. And that first 6 inches of water or so that's the water that's going to carry a lot of the non-point source pollutants. So that's the water that you really want to be treating. Number of construction photos here for this one as well. Really nothing more than, you know, concrete curbs and some stone. These are the check dams in this particular case, a little bit larger rock. You're using mulch between, you know, these cells here, but then there's more of a pea gravel kind of material up in here in the forebay. So here's this is kind of the eye and ear catching fact about this, is that this bar right here represents when the rain garden was constructed, time across the bottom here, and then intensity of rainfall on the left. So before the rain garden was constructed, you know, these peaks at different times of the year and the amount of rainfall that was getting into the storm sewer system nearby. They built the rain garden, and then when it came online, you know, the amount of water going into the adjacent storm sewer system dropped to almost nothing. It was just nearly zero. Pops back up here. This was in November of 05. But that was just a really amazing fact to me. And just a few more numbers here, but the one that's sort of most intriguing is that the total runoff reduction that they realized through this project was 94%. So 94% less stormwater going into the system. So that means there's that much less volume in a combined sewer, and much less likely to overflow and back up into basements. That's what it looks like during the winter. You know, the rock becomes very important. The hardscape becomes very important during the winter time. It's aesthetically, you know, going to be a little more appealing than if there was none of that in there. And their interpretive information then again. So this one was at $90,000, 1,900 square feet. It was quite a bit more expensive than a couple of the previous ones, but, you know, there was more involved. It was larger. The maintenance schedule on this is, their experience right now is just an annual visit. So really not bad at all. And no reports of neighbors' basements backing up at this point. Just a couple last images here. This is way, you know, those were 3 of the very initial experiments that Portland did. They've since built, they tell me, hundreds of these all over the city. And these are just a couple of different places that they've incorporated these. And you can get a sense of how they've dealt with the details and the aesthetic of them. Inlet in the middle here, water sort of pouring in from a number of different places around it. So here are a few lessons learned from Portland. They talk about how important it is to get a detailed topographic survey. Usually, any engineers in the room at all, or people who deal with surveys, or you know, you guys will know it's typical to get maybe 1-foot contours and then spot elevations on a you know, grid of some kind, 20-foot grid or whatever. Portland recommends, if you're going to get real detailed with this work, to get surveys with contours at 1/10 of a foot intervals. They've found that working with water is just working with a lot of minutia, and the guy who presented this talked about how they had a project at one point that wasn't quite working the way they thought, and they realized that thermoplastic striping on the pavement in this parking lot was sort of diverting water away from where they wanted it to go. So you know, very small changes in pavement and so forth can have an effect on what happens with the water. They've really diversified their plant palette. They've tried, you know, monocultures of things, and you know, if that doesn't perform well, then, you know, the entire monoculture you know, dies and it's not very effective. So they encourage stock market planting, as they say. Understanding the maintenance program, very important. They use an amended soil composition that's got about 30% organic matter in it. So compost, and then the rest of it would be topsoil and sand. And soil prep is critical. We talked earlier about breaking up the bottom of that pit so that there can be infiltration. And then they just allow a lot of time for construction administration. Again, contractors a little bit unfamiliar, many of them, with with what it is that we're trying to accomplish with these things. So this is Miller Showers Park then, a project that ratioed